Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Laura Badwin, and I'm joined by a good friend, Mrs. Jess Eaton. We are here today to talk about going back to school during this pandemic in the time of COVID-19. I know at my work, I've had a lot of questions about, is it okay to send my kids to school? What should we do if they do go to school? How should we navigate virtual learning? A lot of questions that parents have, and we hope that we're going to be able to answer some of those. And Jess is here to provide us some tips on keeping our kids mentally healthy and prepared as we navigate this time in the pandemic and our virtual learning experience. I just wanted to introduce Jess a little bit. She's been a good friend of mine for a couple of years. She received her undergraduate degree in psychology and computer applications from the University of Notre Dame. She has a Master of Science in counseling psychology from Colorado State University. And she focused her research and teaching efforts in the area of health psychology and child development, and has been in the past the school counselor and facilitated the school's health and wellness programming, as well as helped to coordinate different services for students with special needs. She herself is a mom of 2 boys, so this topic interests her as well. So let's get started. I thought that we would maybe just start off with some information on some of the new topics and new data that have been out and about, and please feel free to ask questions as we are going through this. We will be answering them live and we can see them as they come through. But so recently you've probably heard from a study coming out of Chicago and a study also this morning that came out of South Korea talking about the increase in viral load that they've noticed in kids. All along through this pandemic, we've talked about how kids are less at risk, not zero risk, but just less at risk. And now we're discovering more about children and their ability to transmit the virus. What we've noted now is that they do carry the same viral load that adults carry. Now, what does that mean? We're still not sure, because it could mean that they can transmit the virus just the same. But as of now, the data is just not yet supporting that. They're able to transmit the virus, but I don't think they can do it yet as efficiently. And as we begin to open up things more, we'll begin to learn a little bit more about that. On the same topic of viral load, we wanted to touch base about the masks and their ability to reduce the viral load. And that's the whole point of wearing the masks, right? We don't know who's sick, because there is a proportion of people that are asymptomatic, meaning they do not have any symptoms. They're not coughing, they're not having fevers. And those people still also shed virus and have a viral load similar to people that do have symptoms. So it's important that we are covering up so that we can prevent the spread of the coronavirus. And that's one of the biggest issues with wearing that mask. So if you were exposed and didn't have any covering, the viral load that you were exposed to is much higher. And in studies that came out of Italy and China early on, we know that an increased viral load led to more severity of illness as well as mortality. So we just have to be very careful about that. We're trying to reduce the spread, and also it can protect you from getting too sick, so that if you were exposed to somebody, but you were wearing a mask, then your likelihood of getting really sick is a little bit lower by doing that. So let's do our best to try to wear those masks when we're out and about and cannot physical distance, all right? I know that we've heard also studies that came out from the camps for YMCA, where all those children and some of the counselors tested positive. Again, that speaks to trying to not do too many of those areas, where we've got large groups of people around each other. We really need to focus on the physical distancing. Being outdoors is great, but in those instances, if you read the studies a little bit clearer, you saw that there was a lot of cohorting in the same room as, other campers, which means, obviously viral loads continuing throughout the night. In addition, they were doing other activities like singing and things that we know propels the virus a little bit more. And there was not a lot of mask wearing. Now, I wanted to bring up that YMCA camp, because there's another point on there that I think is something very important that we focus on, which is a lot of those people tested for coronavirus before they went to the camp. And I think one of the criteria was they had to have a negative test. And when they all went to camp, they presumably were negative for coronavirus because they had been tested. Testing gives you information on that one point in time, all right? So you could test negative today, but if you had been exposed and you're still within that 14-day of exposure, well, maybe you won't test positive till a couple of days later, and that test has somehow given you a false sense of security that makes you think, oh, I can go about and do these things. Now, if you test negative and then you kind of stay isolated for 14 days and do nothing else and make sure you have no symptoms that develop, then you can make the argument that then you could go. But I think what was happening is people were testing negative, they were going about their business, and then they were going to the camp, and that's how you got those positive cases. Now, Jess has a lot of information that's going to help us with taking care of our kids mentally during this time of the pandemic, as we're approaching our virtual learning, especially here in Cobb County, and I know around the country, different people are preparing for that. One thing that we want to discuss is the anxiety and the depression that we've seen a rise of, and out of studies that came out of China, and also recently in the United States, we're seeing anywhere from 17 to 20% increase in anxiety and depression. So Jess, what are some tips that you think parents can utilize to, allay the fears of the kids a little bit during this pandemic?
I think number one is just acknowledging this new temporary normal. You don't want to suppress it, but you also don't want to exaggerate it. You're asking them how they feel regularly, telling them how you feel. It's okay to not feel normal all the time and to model that to your children. But really listen to them, help them name their feelings. Just by saying them out loud can help significantly just on the emotional effects afterwards, and validating how they feel. You don't have to agree with how they feel, but just saying, wow, it sounds like you're feeling this way, can really help them feel more at peace.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. I remember when we first began in this pandemic, and the kids were obviously fearful about what was going on. It was important to be honest about what's happening and how they could contribute to making the situation better in their own way. Mm-hmm. I also, I've got 3 boys and they're going in different grades, and for each one of them, it's a different milestone. As we're preparing for the virtual learning aspect, what are some things that parents can, take away to say, okay, this is how you can best prepare your child for the virtual learning months ahead or weeks ahead, whatever that may be?
I think, start by having a family meeting and talk about, all right, this is what the school year looks like right now. Try and have a positive attitude about it, but really setting a routine. Kids thrive in routine and stability. It just gives them comfort. It helps their self-confidence. So set up a routine. It may not be the routine you had last August. It might not be the routine that your neighbors have, but whatever works best for your family in this situation, have a meeting, set up what you're going to do, have a study place, get them something exciting about it. We just picked out these new chairs, and it was like the coolest thing ever. So just something to get them excited, something to get them to feel like normal. What else? Sleep. I don't know if y'all are like us, but we've been watching hockey late at night and not getting up really early. So we're starting on Monday, getting back on a school routine. Just the research behind regular sleep is it helps your mood, it helps your anxiety, it helps you actually think better in your memory, which obviously helps at school.
Yeah, exactly. And for any of you parents that have children who have things like attention deficit disorder, and you're wondering, how in the world am I going to get my child to sit in front of a computer for hours on end? I think getting them back on a schedule now, a week before you're starting school, or whenever your school is going to start, a week or 2, if you were able to kind of just start getting them back on track, is a great idea. Developing that structure, establishing the routines, the good sleep, the regular physical activity, that's going to help and go a long way in kind of doing, allowing them to be able to be successful at the start of the school year. Now, when we talk about getting back to school, in-person school, face-to-face learning, which I think, no matter where we are on this now, I think we are all on the same page and have the same goal in mind. We want our children back in schools. I think we can all agree on that, right? So I just want to make sure we know there is no perfect answer right now, right? What may work for one family doesn't necessarily work for another family. Each family has to make decisions based on their own personal lifestyle, their family that they interact with on a regular basis, and the health of their family at baseline, right? What works for me may not work for a family that lives with their 80-year-old grandmother or with an immunocompromised sibling. So we just have to be mindful of that, we may have strong opinions about which way we want learning to go, but also recognize that our neighbors may have different and competing opinions about that. And there is no perfect answer. We know that being face-to-face is the best way to go, and that's what we want to do. But we also have to recognize that there are those nuances. In addition, while kids are not as high risk, there are lots of teachers, administration, and staff that work with our kids that are at high risk. So we just have to keep that in mind. So Jess, when we talk about those risks that are out there, and maybe, teachers that might have it, or let's say kids go to school and then they hear somebody has it, how can we address that, fear or anxiety? And, maybe there are some kids that say, yikes, I don't want to go back to school because I'm afraid. What do you think about that?
I think number one, like you said, acknowledging the feelings that the fear does exist. Just saying it makes it less powerful. But realizing that feelings and situations are temporary. Just that saying that this too shall pass. Really keeping that in mind, that this is not a permanent situation, and anything we can do to empower our kids and to help them see how they can help the situation will help them do better in the long run as well. And, there's lots of little tips out there. I've got 2 little anxious monkeys at home, just about life in general. They get it from me. But, there's little tips that you can do. We've been really working on mindfulness in our family. I always thought it was kind of hokey, but it really makes a lot of sense. It's just focusing on the here and now, and it gets you away from going down the path of the what ifs. And there's a whole bunch of different fun activities that you can do, or just little tasks that you can do to help bring you back, keep you calm, not thinking about the what if I get sick, or what if my teacher gets sick, and it really just brings you back. For me, I find I usually always have a ponytail holder on my wrist. And this, like when I find myself perseverating and going down like the darkened world tunnels, I'll just like snap my band and picture a stop sign in my head and say stop. And so that way I can focus on the here and now and like redirect my attention to something else. Really just getting your kids to work on their, change of thought process. And, just by nature, some children, people, humans in general, can be more pessimistic than others, more anxious than others, but just learning that optimism and resiliency and mental strength, they are all teachable. They're all contagious. So anything you can do to help bestow that upon your children is helpful.
I think that's so important. So would you recommend for parents to kind of establish gratitude journals, or, some other exercise like that, daily walks? What are some like practical, like hands-on tips that somebody could kind of pull away with to do?
Yeah. I think gratitude is huge. Laura and I were just talking about the other day, I read a study that Vietnam vets who practice gratitude regularly were less likely to suffer PTSD. Now, this is not probably as traumatic as Vietnam. So I think if it helped them, it can definitely help us. Gratitude journals is a thing, but again, you got to do what works for you. Like my rising 6th grader hates writing. Like just the physical act of putting a pencil in his hand makes him want to vomit. So we don't do a journal. We sit down at the table and say, okay, we sit down, we say our blessing, and then what's one thing that you learned today? What's one thing that made you laugh today? What's one thing that you're grateful for? And I think, with gratitude also, optimism, teaching that, doing something that that's in the mindfulness. There's lots of good books out there, which I could give you too. But anyways, where was I going?
In terms of giving tips and
Yes.
for your kids, they don't like writing, so the journal is not the way to do it.
We verbalize it. Or like if we're just riding in the car and you've got a captive audience in the car. Not that we're really going anywhere, but when we go to pick up our Target groceries outside, we are able to just have those conversations where we talk about gratitude. Going outside, what is it called? Ecotherapy is just very powerful. I think going outside 30 minutes 3 times a week has profound effects on your mental health and well-being. Just, go outside, do your reading outside, or lay in the grass or something like that. Exercise. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we just got a question that asks specifically about, kind of where you were heading with the exercise. How about for the older children? Summer wants to know, their sports have been canceled or postponed. So how is it that we can help these guys cope? They not only saw their schools closed, but then their camps closed, and now their sports are closed or postponed. So what can we tell them? How can we help them?
I think about this as an athlete. I was a diver at the University of Notre Dame, and it was my life as a teenager. And I can't imagine if being a teenager, when that was your identity, that was everything you do, and it was canceled. I think number one, as parents, we're the driving force of how our children react to this. It stinks. And acknowledging that, but what else can you do on the sideline while you're not engaging in the team sport? Can you do the sport safely? Like, we took my son, who plays hockey, and another friend to a parking lot. They didn't get up in each other's business, but one was in the goal and one was shooting at each other from a distance. You can get creative and do it safely. You can, do family exercises. I've got my kids doing the 21-day fix with me. I mean, they're not doing it to a T, but they come down and run around and then they give one leave. But really just keeping physically active, but and acknowledging it's difficult, but we will survive.
I agree. It is difficult. And, I think it's hard for everybody. Obviously, it's hard for parents. They're suffering in many ways, either economically, or they have loved ones that have suffered from this illness. And then they have the stress of, worrying about what's going on with their children and what the future implications of everything might be. I think sports is a great outlet, and I completely agree with you. If you can get outside and do things safely, then that's the way to go. I think on the scale of different sports, the ones that are focused outdoors are probably the safer ones. The ones where you don't have to get too close to each other, swimming, tennis, those types of things are also good idea. A study out of Japan looked at the transmission of the virus when you're indoors versus outdoors. And there's almost 19-fold increase in transmission of the virus when you're inside. So, we're trying to physically distance ourselves from other people, but recognizing that we can't stay socially distanced forever, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to find those ways that we can be physically distant outside with our friends and still be safe. And if you are in an area where they're able to have some sort of organized sports, allow those children, to play. But maybe when they're on the sidelines, that they put their mask on, right? When they're not out on the big field and they're more closer to each other. If you have baseball players, maybe when they're in the dugout, they're wearing those masks. They are trying to space out. We have to try to remember that this virus, unfortunately, is not going to go away anytime soon. I think it's going to be with us for the rest of this year, likely for next year as well. And even if a vaccine comes into play, it's not necessarily going to eliminate the virus right away. And probably our children will be one of the last people that get immunized, because we always like to wait and make sure the vaccine is 100% safe as possible before it's administered to our kids. So having said that, we have to find useful ways that can allow our kids to still have a childhood, and navigate and mitigate the virus as much as possible. We had another question about what is our advice with multiple children doing digital learning with one parent at home? I think we're both in this same boat, right? I mean, you've got 2, I've got 3. They're all going to be doing some digital learning. So yeah, I think that's going to be challenging for the parent. Do you have any advice on that, Jess?
I think number one, giving yourself grace. It's not going to go perfectly, and that's okay. You're going to have bad days, and that's okay. And acknowledging that, but also, reaching out to your kids' teachers and seeing if there's any flexibility in terms of how you do things, or, figuring out a plan. And lots of coffee, not too much, but a little bit is good for your memory. It just grace and patience, and remembering this shall pass. If we keep working as a community to make these mitigation efforts, that it will pass and we can get through it, but it is not ideal, obviously.
Yeah. I think if you have multiple children, if you're able to kind of spread them out a little bit, give them their own personal space, I think that will go a long ways in allowing them to really feel like, hey, I'm in school. This is, my space, my class, I think that will help, setting a structure, which hopefully this time around, the counties have worked diligently on trying to get more structure with the classroom setting and having the teaching, as opposed to last time, it was maybe more worksheets and workbook related. So I think that's going to help them stay on task as well. But, it's not without its challenges. And I think I agree with you, Jess. We just have to, cut ourselves some slack. We're going to do the best that we can with the situation that we have on hand. Someone else wants to know, how safe is indoor swimming for someone with a low immunity? So I'm not sure if you mean with low immunity being that they're immunocompromised, or if it's not necessarily that bad, but maybe they're just a little bit at higher risk. I think you can look at what the ventilation system is in the indoor swimming area that you're in. As of now, it has not been shown that we can transmit the virus like in the water, especially if it's clean.
Chlorine kills everything, right?
What's that?
Chlorine kills everything, right?
Yeah. Seems that way. But, if the pool is treated properly, it's highly unlikely that when they're in the water that they're going to have the virus transmitted. Now, having said that, if they're congregating in the water and their heads are above water and somebody is coughing in their face, then there is a potential risk there. But if you're able to go swim in a pool and you've got a lane all to yourself, I think it's about as safe as you're going to be able to get. So probably a good way to exercise. Another question we have, what about sending a 3 to 4-year-old to daycare? So, again, this becomes one of those personal family decisions. If you have no choice but to send them because both parents are working, or just the mental load of having a child in the home all the time while you're trying to do all the other things that are on your plate, it is too much, then I would talk to the daycare center. What are their protocols? How many students are in the class? Are they able to distance at all? We have to remember, in this age group, more than likely the transmission is going to be from the adult to the children and less likely the other way around. So we have to see, what are the rules for the teachers and staff that work at the school? Are they requiring masks for them? Who else is allowed in and out of the building? Limiting visitors is a big thing. What are their sick protocols? Are they checking temperatures? Those types of things are important to know how serious the daycare center is taking it. And then that might make you feel a little better about sending your child to daycare. There is no right or wrong answer. You do what's best for your family. And then as you go along with whatever decision you make, just make sure you try to mitigate as much as possible.
On the same note, I had a friend text me the other day just saying, am I scarring my 3-year-old for life by not sending her to preschool this year? We have older parents that live with us. We can't do it. And if that's your concern on the other respect, 3-year-olds need safety, stability, love, and play. So if you can provide that at home, then don't think twice. They're going to be okay. Play is important. Socialization is important. So, if you can provide that safely and you're unable to send them to school despite wanting to, they're going to be okay too.
Yeah. That's actually very important. And I do get that question a lot where people will ask and genuinely are concerned, like, if I don't put them in daycare, are they going to grow up and be socially okay? And I think we have to remember that in many other parts of the world, kids do not enter school this early because maybe it's not as common to have both parents in the workforce. And so they have that ability to keep kids home longer. So at home, you're reading to them, you're playing with them, you're showing them love, you're giving them some structure and stability, and that's really all that they need at that age. And thank you, Katrina, for giving us your tips too. That Katrina said that she's got kids different ages who are learning, and she thought separate spaces helped them out, and that headphones for their laptops were something that they added, and a heavy dose of patience. Amen to that.
Laura, don't you have advice on headphones with volume control?
Yes, I mean, I definitely would recommend, if you're going to get headphones for your kids, if you have the ones that are specifically for children, I recommend those, and you can find them online, or you can get them at one of your big box retailers. But they have certain ones that can only go up to a certain decibel, because the last thing you want is your kids to put on headphones for the next several weeks and then they begin to have hearing loss because they're turning up the volume to, the maximum. So just be careful about that. I don't know if I would want them to have like Beats headphones, where you can really get a loud sound in there. So just be careful with that. Just to kind of shift gears a little bit, we talk about how are we going to get our kids back in school, right? So, we're trying to work with doing our best for virtual learning, but our goal is to get them back to face-to-face learning. I mean, I think we can all agree that's where we want them to be. So what needs to happen? All right. The first thing that needs to happen is our community spread has to be decreased. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to listen in on Dr. Memark, who's here from our Cobb Douglas Health Department, as she gave some of the statistics about a week ago. Maybe it's 2 weeks now, but she mentioned that in June and July, we had about 15% positivity rate for tests. So, basically 15 out of every 100 people, are positive for coronavirus, in terms of extrapolating that data. And we have about now 373 cases per 100,000 people here in Cobb County. And you can go to the Georgia Department of Health and kind of pull up whatever county that you're in. And I'm sure if you're listening in from other states, your own health department has similar structure. Just to give people an idea of what safer numbers are, you want positivity rate to be less than 5%, if possible, before we get them back in school. And you want those case numbers to be kind of 5 per 100,000 or less to really feel confident about opening schools. And it's like a multi-part thing with that, because the more cases you have in the community, then that obviously means that our kids are being infected as well. And so then those kids are going to school and are more likely then to spread the virus to other kids in their class, especially if we don't have the mitigation strategies that we need, like the masking and the physical distancing, which we know a lot of schools, unfortunately, don't have that ability. So that plays a huge part in it, which is why from an adult perspective, like a parent perspective, what can we do? We can do our best to help kind of stop the transmission of the virus by wearing our masks when we're going out, physically distancing, and obviously washing your hands whenever you touch anything that isn't clean. We also need increased testing. Right now, we still have a very long turnaround time when we get tests. If you were to go and get a test now, you may not get your result back for about 7 days. Well, once that result comes back, we've kind of lost that window where we're able to contact trace and figure out, who were you beside and who did you come in contact with, and let's isolate those people. And so it just kind of perpetuates that spread of the virus. So we need to scale up on the testing, and we need to have the contact tracers that are able to call. That was a big part of going to virtual for Cobb County, is when they realized the community spread and the lack of personnel that would be able to follow up on all the schools that maybe would test positive, as we're seeing here outside in some of our neighboring counties. That's a big part of it. And then finally, as we've seen, we go through the surges in numbers where the cases go up, and then there's a lag and you see where the hospitalizations start to go up. And that's kind of where we were also, where we had decreased hospital beds. So we need to make sure we have hospital beds available. And then the last thing that kind of lags from that, after you see the surge, the increased hospitalizations, is you start to see the mortality. So we just kind of have to be conscientious about that. Those are some tips that we can use in terms of the adults to get our kids back into the classroom, face-to-face learning. Now, let's get to this question from Summer. She asks, what advice can you give to parents with children with disabilities such as autism? Jess, do you have something about this?
Yes. I think number one, going back to structure is very important. Children with autism and ADHD and various disabilities thrive with structure. Number two, reach out to teachers and therapists who have been successful with your child in the past, and what worked with them, and maybe you can implement that at home. Number three, not to go against Laura's health mitigation efforts, but I think you really have to think about what's best for your family and what are calculated risks you can take. I had a conversation with a dear friend a while ago who has a son with autism, and he was really struggling with isolation at home. And so they set up some therapy and a couple calculated risks that have made, a world of difference in their house. I mean, they're not just running around naked with no masks on, but they're doing other things that are really more beneficial in the long run for their child. Yeah, I think that's.
And I think that that's so important. And the other thing is, we have to recognize the stress that kind of puts on families, especially, in an already stressful environment, and worrying about what's best for your child. If you have created any kind of bubbles with you or another family where you can rely on someone to kind of, help or watch your child for a brief period of time to give you some respite periodically, that's also a good idea. It's always good to stay yourself as a parent mentally healthy and charged, so that you can give the best of yourself for your children. And I know that it can be tough, to be around, 24/7 and feel like you have to be the parent and you're helping to teach, and, you're worried about all these aspects. So reaching out for help is very much recommended, and don't be afraid to do that.
Yes. My dad always says, when you get on an airplane, when they go through the security warnings, they say, put your mask on before your child's. So take care of yourself first, and then you can help your children.
That's exactly right. Now, I know, a while ago we kind of were talking about all these different tips to stay mentally healthy, and you created an amazing list of items and information about that. And that's going to be posted on our Facebook page. Awesome. I was wondering if you could maybe go over some of those tips for us, Jess. Some of the ones that maybe you didn't already cover. That would be helpful, I think.
I think a big one is giving yourself, in addition to routines, giving your children a sense of control. Our brains just they need control to work properly in our lives, and lack of control, lack of predictability are what cause stress. So if you can help minimize those issues in your life, that is really helpful. And I know right now is all unpredictable and uncontrollable with what's going on. So just, giving your kids choices, little choices, reasonable, safe choices in life can help tremendously. They've done studies in nursing homes where they've given their residents a choice of, would you like to play mahjong first or have reading hour first? And just little choices like that actually extend their life. So we can give little choices. I mean, not like, hey, do you want to do school today? Obviously, you know what that answer would be, but reasonable, safe choices like, which subject do you want to do first? Or, not necessarily what do you want for lunch, because my kids would want ice cream. You could say, what fruit do you want in your lunch? And just giving little bits of choices throughout the day can just give them a sense of control and predictability in their life and help their self-esteem. Empowerment is just key. Also, though, with giving control and routine, allow for boredom. It is okay to be bored. Allow for that unscheduled time. Creativity can flourish. It can actually, giving unscheduled time gives them a sense of control because they can make choices as to what they do. But that being said, I've heard I'm bored a lot this summer. So, I understand the need for that. We've talked about exercising, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's important. Exercising 3 days a week, up to 30 minutes, can have the same positive effects as your prescription antidepressant medication. I mean, it's very powerful.
I would probably even go so far as to say, in our time now of digital learning, to try to get exercise in every day. We can imagine that there's going to be more of a sedentary kind of lifestyle that it is established in these first couple of weeks of virtual learning. So getting them moving, get their heart rate up periodically will help to kind of boost the adrenaline so that they can focus for the half of the day.
Yep. Even in between classes, like turn on a song and everyone just dance it out or something. Just, get moving throughout the day. And that really helps. Kids with ADHD and autism also really need that built in with their day. Get dressed. Get dressed for your day. It shows that it can help improve performance, that it can improve confidence. We've been terrible about that this summer. We were really good during during school days, but after writing this up and thinking about it, I'm like, this is going to be our goal. We're going to start getting dressed again. So now, granted, though, pick your battles. My 8-year-old has not worn underwear in 147 days, but that is not an important battle. You just got to get dressed for your day, but do it however you want. And be silly and find fun. Mary Poppins said, in every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. And I think that is just so, so important right now. The climate is so divisive and contentious and serious, and all this talk about mortality rates and pandemic and everything, that I think we just need to try and find fun in every day, even if it's just little silly things. Just try and find the best in it.
Yeah. I like that. And I think we have to remember that this is going to be one of those defining moments in our children's life, right? One day, this will be written about in the history books, just like some of the other events that have happened in the past. And they're going to look back at this time and think about, what did that time feel like for me? And they're going to describe that to their children. And, what is that takeaway point that you want your kids to have? Do you want them to have a sense of, we made the best of it. We had a good time. That was our chance as a family to bond like we've never bonded before. Or do you want it to be a time where it was sad or fearful or stressed? So we can kind of help to shape and create that environment for our children. We have a question about, what tips do we have to deal with the drastic increase in use of social media and its impact on mental health? So that's a really, really great question, because prior to all of the digital learning, obviously, the American Academy of Pediatrics had a lot of guidance related to social media use and being on devices. And obviously, there was a lot of leeway that was made to accommodate for our children being on devices and being in a situation where they were sheltering in place. I continue to advise my patients and families that this should still be limited as much as you can, right? We know they're going to be on the devices for a certain amount of time throughout the day, but we can still limit it after school is done. And maybe make the time after school to be kind of device free. And if you have an older child in the home in those middle school and, high school, give them another hour later in the day where they can get back on and check in with their friends, but they really need a break. And I also like to remind people that spending too much time on social media, reading the news, has been shown to cause more anxiety and depression, whether it's an adult or, teenager or child. So just be conscientious of that. Remember that when you are having social media and, you're in your home, you're bringing that into your home as well. So just be mindful of whoever it is you are allowing into your safe space so that you're not leaving a digital footprint that is going to follow you forever. Jess, do you have any tips about that?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think obviously we're going to be on it a lot. The kids are going to be on it a lot during the day. So having that space in the afternoon. And when you get on social media, do it with purpose. Don't sit there and scroll. If you need to, set a timer. And, I've really had to limit it because I found myself getting stressed about it. So yeah, but you can also use not social media, but maybe technology purposefully in the sense that like every Sunday night we have a Zoom call with friends or with family. So you can use it as a form of connectivity as long as you're using it with purpose and not just mind numbing, staring at the computer. But yes, limit it.
Yeah. And then Katrina wants to know, do you have any tips for teens, middle school age students for their stage of social and emotional development?
Bless you, Katrina. We're not there. I mean, I guess 6th grade is middle school, but this is hard because this is where they are looking for independence and wanting to be self-sufficient, and being trapped at home with your parents for 147 days is probably the most unimaginable tragedy for any teenager ever. So again, give them grace. Find areas where you can give them independence. Find areas where they can, hang safely with their friends. Maybe if you have a couple families that are making the same choices as you, let the kids hang out outside on your porch. Let them have some socialization, give them some leeway in terms of chatting with their friends visually on social media. But yes, this is very, very hard for teenagers.
Yeah, and absolutely. And those teenage years is when, they're trying to establish their independence, that they are getting ready to leave the home as they prepare to go to college, which is another area that we have not even, barely touched on and everything associated with the pandemic. But giving them their space, if the family wants to do a lot of things and the teenager has been participating, well, every now and again, they need their space just like adults kind of need their own time. So just provide them with that and make sure that they're doing it in a safe environment. And I agree with you, having those families that do the same thing that you do and you can feel comfortable with that, that's a good thing, to hang out outside, and that should be pretty safe. So we also have to recognize that teenagers do transmit the virus just like adults do. So I recommend that they wear masks when they're not able to really physically distance. When you go back to school, especially in those high schools and colleges, I definitely recommend wearing the masks. And just along those same lines, as we talk about returning to in school, some of the things that parents can do is, before your child goes to school, check their temperature, make sure they don't have a fever. If they're feeling sick at all, keep them home. If you know that they've been exposed to somebody who had coronavirus, don't send them to school, keep them quarantined. If they've been tested and you're waiting for the result, don't send them to school. We have to understand that our decisions, our personal decisions, are now really, really affecting the community at large. And so if we were to send our child to school thinking, oh, it's just nothing, I'll give a little bit of Tylenol, they'll be okay, and then they come back positive, well, then they maybe have infected the other children in their class, and then those children went home and infected their grandmother or their aunt or anyone else who would be considered high risk. So just kind of keep that in mind. I recommend starting a multivitamin. We talked about drinking plenty of fluids, getting that regular physical activity. And those are just some of the things that we can do before our kids even leave our home to go to the school. And then once in the classroom, let's be careful about being, too critical and try to be helpful with the schools. Talk to your schools, ask them, what can we do to help you as you navigate the pandemic, as we try to get our kids back in class. Maybe they need help to procure, cleaning supplies. Maybe they just need supportive words for their teachers and staff. So let's just know that everyone is putting forth their best effort to get our kids back in the classroom and doing the best that they can. And we can do our part by being helpful to that. Jess, do you have anything to add?
I agree. And I think I liked your point about thinking about other people. Teaching our kids to be helpers and kindness and random acts of kindness and helpers towards other people is what is going to be what gets us through this phase, I think, just from a health perspective, but also a mental health perspective. I mean, just the benefits of kindness are so wide reaching that if you can help your kids think about, what, there are these other families in our community that this is horribly tragic for, having to learn from home. What can our kids do to help them? It changes perspective for them. It takes just the sense of tragedy away from them. It just opens their mind to what the bigger picture and what's going on. So I think it's helpful to other people, but also helpful to yourself too.
Yeah.
Did that make sense?
Yeah, it did. And if you are in any way a part of your school and you're able to help make any of those decisions, then some of the tips that have been recommended through various organizations, whether it's the CDC or the American Academy of Pediatrics and multiple other children's hospitals around the country that have began to provide some guidance about this. Some of the tips that we're recommending is cohorting students, right? So maybe keeping a certain number of students in the class, and it's those same students that kind of go everywhere together, so that if anyone were to get sick, it would be from that same group and you could easily contact trace. You also want to work on utilizing the outdoor spaces. We already talked about the decreased risk of exposure to the virus when you are outdoors. So if you have an opportunity to do classrooms outdoors periodically, that's a great idea, or bigger spaces. Physical distancing, wearing those masks, limiting the unnecessary visitors. And then ventilation is another aspect where the school system may not be able, obviously, to change out their entire HVAC system, but you could discuss how we can better ventilate, keeping windows open when the weather is nice to allow that flow, changing filters periodically. And if you're not already a part of your school's PTA, or if your school has foundations, volunteer, be a part, ask how we can help. What is it that we can do to kind of make this school year the best school year they have, right? We want to make sure that we're entering this school year with a positive attitude so that our children get that as they take it away for the year ahead. Jess, any last words that you want to say to our viewers?
We can do this? Yeah, I don't know. We can do this though. This too shall pass.
Yes, absolutely. We can do it. I hope you enjoyed listening to some of our tips for back to school during the pandemic. We tried to touch base on some of the issues that are affecting our kids in these days and give you some tips on the virtual learning and how to return to face-to-face learning. We're going to provide some information on our website with tips from Jess that you could easily print out and kind of hang up in your own offices and homes so that you can follow along some of those rules to keep your kids mentally healthy. And thank you so much for joining us. If you have more questions, please feel free to add them to the bottom, and we will try to answer them as best we can. And until next time, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jess.